Today in this webinar we wish to pay tribute to the tremendous contribution that Paul Rayner made to the development of program management. And we'll hear a little bit more of that later. The inspiration for today's event is Gower's Handbook of Program Management, which is really the Magna Carta of books about program management. We're privileged today to have 4 of the original authors on the line, and I'll introduce them all shortly. In addition to looking back and reflecting on what has been happening in the field of program management, we want to look forward. So today I'm happy to announce there is a plan for a refresh of the handbook, and we'll be seeking practitioners as contributors in the near future. So to start with, let's meet with the authors. So in terms of the contribution today, we will have John Chapman, who's going to talk about delivering value through benefits. Adrian will then pick up with his subject of people is difficult. We have Geoff Leigh, who's going to talk about the evolution of governance, and Reiss will follow up at the end. Icing on the cake, has portfolio management come of age? And there's a picture of myself as chair of program management, not that I was a contributor of the original handbook. So the Gower handbook. This is an image of it, and Gower there, who we know for publication of project management resources. The current edition of the handbook actually extends to over 700 pages in length. It's packed full of useful tools and techniques, top tips on how program management should be done. It includes a maturity model and guidance on how to benchmark performance against best of breed and drive out improvements of that performance. So what we're going to move to now is our first poll, and the poll is going to be which ingredient of the 4 mentioned so far makes the greatest contribution to program success. So let's switch to the poll and launch that one. So there we are. You can see for starters the votes are in, and that clearly at the moment managing people is a clear winner. In terms of follow-up, we've got a pretty close tie between benefits management and governance and portfolio management. Sorry, Geoff, right at the back there. So what I'm going to do now is hand on to the first of our speakers, who's just going to say a little bit about Paul Rayner. So over to you.
I met Paul Rayner in certainly the last millennium on a railway train between Leeds and London, and we found quickly out that we had lots of common interests, which included cycling and program management. And Paul made an excellent job of his time as the chair of the Program Management Special Interest Group, and had made an enormous contribution to the group prior to that. It was a very sad day. Oh, and then of course he was a key member of the team that we put together in towards the end of the millennium to write the Gower Handbook of Program Management. So it was a very sad day that for me and his family and all of the people involved in the Gower Handbook, when he became ill in 2010 and eventually sadly died in August 2011. And I know that his family, or some members of his family, I believe, are listening in to this event today. So I want to pay the greatest respect to Paul and the contribution he made to program management over the, particularly the first few years of this millennium. Sadly missed.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Geoff. Let's go straight into your piece then, John.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Geoff. And I knew Paul for some years, and a very fine gentleman. I enjoyed his company. He was a great advocate and leader on program management, and Geoff, I support everything you said, and he is sadly missed. Now, in the discussion on delivering value through benefits, I worked with Paul on this chapter, and he gave me a lot of insight into the work that he did when he was with Logica and how they looked at benefits, and my thanks to him for his guidance. So my commentary here, as you see on the screen, is looking at levels of maturity in benefits management and a personal reflection on what's changed between when we did the original manuscript and what I see now out in the marketplace. My contact details, as you can see, are at the bottom of the screen. The first question, and Mo, if you could run a poll, is do business cases in your organisation include financial and non-financial benefits with a timeline for realisation?
So there we are. In terms of the yes and the sometimes, I'm guessing that takes probably about 3/4, so that gives you something to work with there, John.
Thank you. Now the second question, everyone, that I'm going to ask of you today: does your organisation actively track the actual programme benefits against the expected benefits? And as we start on the journey of a programme thinking that we're going to do great things financially and non-financially, and what we're interested in is how many people then look at what was actually delivered.
The results are now being shared, and again, just so you know, we've got 20%, not Geoff, John rather, 20% on the yes, 43% on the sometimes, so that gives us about 2/3, 34% on the no, and 3% on the frequently. So that's split about 2/3 on the yes-ish versus 1/3 on the no.
Thank you, Merv, and thank you everyone for your feedback. Now moving on then with my presentation. The projects feed into programs and programs feed into benefits, and I'll come on to that. And looking back, I think at the time when we did the manuscript, projects were focused on the technology and the people resources. For many of you in the software area, it was looking at software solutions and the timeline for delivery. What's the timeline to get it live, or what's the timeline to get the project over the line, whatever that may be. And there wasn't a lot of focus on benefits to be delivered. Perhaps on reflection, it relates to the maturity of project delivery, and people were still trying to understand how to deliver projects before they moved on to thinking about the benefits that were going to come from them. What we emphasized in the handbook is that the benefits should come from the system usage, not from the installation of the system. The picture there is meant to be one of a whiteboard. There's no point in buying a whiteboard if you're not going to use it. And an important distinction is that projects create the deliverables, also known as the outputs, or in the Prince methodology, the products. We don't actually then say this is the realization of those benefits. We are putting in place those deliverables. To use another analogy, we bake the cake. We don't have the pleasure of eating it subsequently. And we were saying in the handbook that we then need to step up in our level of maturity. Once you've worked out how to deliver the project and get it there, then you're thinking about what does that mean in the context of the program. So moving on then, and I'm reading from the slide, our program should create capabilities that enable those benefits to be delivered. If we put something on someone's desktop, if we give people information, then they should be able to do something with that information and to change their behaviors, to do something different. Last year at the APM conference, Alan Macklin, one of our program management SIG colleagues, stood up and he talked about within the MOD where you don't just want to get yourself some helicopters, but you do need to use them. And these are discrete pieces of work. We'd have a project that would perhaps go and buy the helicopters, another one that would train people, and then another one that puts them into operation. And we have to think holistically about it. And the project infrastructure works well to set up those deliverables, and then you bring them into the program. The benefits management schematic, and this is taken directly from the Gower handbook. If you look along the bottom, we've got our individual projects, A, B, C, and D, and these feed up into the program to create capabilities. And it's from this program that we should then have the benefit realization. It doesn't perhaps read that well when I copied it out of the book, but it talks about things like improved clinical outcomes, and this is reflective of the good work that Paul did with the NHS. Perhaps greater cost effectiveness as an organisation. I talk when I explain about things like spend control, that you put in a system to track spend, but then you need to do something with that information and perhaps go back to your supply base and work with them to bear down on cost. That's the realisation of the benefit by the business as usual, not the work of the project manager delivering the project, because you're going to run the project into BAU and then from BAU go forward into benefit realisation. We also talked in the program, the Gower Handbook of Program Management, about the program business case. We recognised that there had to be a distinction between the hard and the soft benefits. And sometimes we perhaps get focused on hard benefits. What are those financial things that we can put our hand on our heart and say, yes, this will bring in more revenue, yes, this will reduce cost. But that really limited the scope of delivery. And also many organisations are not just driven by financial imperatives. It is important that we understand that there are what we call perhaps the soft benefits. and the language of the terminology, we suggested perhaps don't use hard and soft, perhaps talk in terms of financial and non-financial benefits. A non-financial benefit could be improved customer service, it could be improved decision-making, it could be risk reduction. And we think that this was important at the time to say use your words carefully when you speak to people. The wider context that we picked up on at the time looks across the pond, as they say, to Kaplan and Norton's work in the balanced scorecard. And I put up on the screen there those 4 perspectives, which was one example that they gave in balanced scorecard. What we're saying is that this does align well with other ideas that are out in the marketplace. It's not just about a project, it's not just about a financial perspective. We should have a look at these other areas and then consider holistically what this means. So what's changed? Well, I think organisational competencies in programme and project delivery have grown. Many people are 2nd, 3rd, 4th generations been through projects. They seem to understand what a project means and what's the change going on. And I think we've now got brain space then about understanding what the impact of that is. In the hierarchy of human consciousness, we were unconsciously incompetent. We didn't know how to deliver projects, and we didn't know we didn't know. Now, perhaps we are consciously competent. We know about the project delivery. We know that something's going to change, or we have an understanding of it, and then we can think further and have the brain space available to think, what does that mean to us? I think there's an important recognition, and certainly the government have published a number of studies, that the IT systems are the enablers. They're not the answer to the problem. Just because you have some piece of magic on your desktop, that's not going to answer the problem. It's an enabler to solve your problems as an organisation. From the top of the organisation, Toto, I think directors and managers now also think in terms of the benefit from a system. They will ask about what are the financial benefits, increase revenue, reduce or contain cost, and what are the non-financial benefits. And if you read the OGC publication on programme management and also the Prince manual, it has 10 different areas split between financial and non-financial benefits. And this is the wider recognition that it's not just about the money. It's about what does this mean to us as organisations, how does it reduce risk, how does it improve morale, how does it improve quality of service. Anything else? Well, I think people want to know when are they going to get it. Will something happen on an IT implementation pre-go live? Will you get it on go live? Or perhaps if you need to build up a data set, you're going to analyse some data, you might want 6 months of information before you can start that business intelligence analysis. And from that, you then go and change what you're doing as an organisation. And the acceptance that it's not all going to happen immediately, things happen over a period of time. So when we pass into business as usual, our programme of projects, we're passing over to benefits management. The acceptance that if it's January today, it might not be until June that we have the information. And then in June, we diarise to analyse that to then look at what we can do differently. So how do we get the benefits as an organisation? And if you look on things like Amazon, there's a lot more literature available. The Association for Project Management have also got a specific interest group on benefits management, and that's been tremendously successful in promoting this idea that it's not just about project, it's about the realisation. I did a search on Amazon, and there are a number of books available now. Gerald Bradley, the one on the right-hand side, has always been very active in promoting benefit realisation, and I think that this is an area that really is worth developing further, and it's encouraging that Gower are going to have a refresh of the book. So as I say, my name's John Chapman. I'm very pleased to be able to present today to you a few thoughts on benefit realisation. My thanks to Paul Rayner, who gave me great insight, and his input to the chapter was invaluable in making sure that we came up with a balanced approach. Merv, if I could hand back to you and pass us on to my fine colleague, Mr. Pyne.
Thanks ever so much for that, John. That's really interesting. Adrian, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Merv, and welcome everybody. My name is Adrian Pyne, and I've been an independent consultant in the business transformation space for many years, and I'm going to found in recent years most of my work has been around making organizations fit places in which projects and programs and portfolios can thrive, and increasingly I've found that that's actually about people, behavior and cultural approaches. So that's really the focus of my stories in the last 10 years and where I think program management and other things are going. Okay, so when we wrote the book as a group, we wanted to produce not an academic work, but a compendium of our long experience. My own program management journey started around 1990, and the program management evolving to deal with business transformation challenges that project management was simply not designed for and not fit for at the time. But what I didn't realize that there were some dark forces seeking to keep us in the dark ages. One of the worst of those, in my view, that keeps success levels way below where they needed to be and still need to be. And this is about the P3 standards themselves. And I'll use the term P3 a few times, and by that I mean portfolio, program, and project management. So 30 years of continuous development in the P3 standards, and yet success rates pan-industry are, well, 30%, 40%. Some studies show as much as 70% failure rates. Well, okay, lies, damn lies and statistics, but any way you look at it, there's a lot of standards development, and improvement is, well, perhaps nothing to write home about. The thing is, though, why should that be? Well, first of all, for me, any management approach can be defined by three components. The management processes, the tools to support the process, and people. So where are we now? Well, currently, I still think that best practice is dominated by process. It's not entirely process, but it's dominated by it. There is a great deal of very good web-based technology tools to support P3, and this should have helped success rates, and yet they're, well, still languishing where they have been for many, many years. Surely we must be missing something. What's left to try? Okay, well, let's look at that by looking again at wastage. Project levels of wastage are way higher than manufacturing, where levels of waste are something like 5%, 10%, or at least if they get to that level, you'd find reports being written in annual reports and some really, really unhappy stakeholders. We don't find that at all when it comes to the much higher levels of wastage in investment in projects. And let's talk about what we're talking about is, as the little graphic there suggests, it's money down the drain. Now, don't get me wrong on this. There are huge successes around projects and programs. There are very, very talented sort of people out there and around. But very often, it's not a question of what the project or the program or even the portfolio manager can do. It's actually what's going on around them as well. But getting back to manufacturing, it's intriguing that manufacturing has taken on board techniques such as just-in-time and improvement methods such as Kaizen and Kanban as part of continuous improvement and even a lean thinking culture. The next barrier is a failure to gain maturity. Embedding even many FTSE 100 or 250 companies have not reached the level of maturity. They've not embedded P3 capability. Projects and especially programs are not easily bedfellows in a business-as-usual organization culture. A typical model for business transformation program is that it's acting across many operational verticals, and that makes them not easy bedfellows. And even if maturity does get embedded, somehow that's not sustained. For example, enterprise PMOs, they come and they go. And this is often because they expose inefficiencies and powerful stakeholders don't like their massive waste exposed. Yes, fear is a factor that can kill P3 performance, and I'll return to that in a minute or two. And then there are misunderstandings that can lead to a wrong P3 solution. Even PwC has got it wrong, in my view, in their 2012 third global survey on the current state of project management, where Scrum is cited as, and I quote, the predominant agile project management methodology in use. It's not. It's part of a development method that project management methods are used in conjunction with. And what of technology? Here mistakes are often compounded by mistiming. Examples include thinking that a P3 tool will somehow fix project performance and trying to run before they can walk buying in tools before your organization is mature enough to get the most out of them. For example, I've seen a £1 million investment in very sophisticated P3 technology that a year after its implementation was barely used by anybody because it simply didn't meet the needs of the business. One common factor in all of these is an X factor that makes the difference, even if it's still, in my view, the poor relation. And here I'm talking about the people stuff. That is, how people behave as individuals or in groups. In other words, the culture of the project and, crucially, in the project's environment, which is why very often, despite having incredibly talented project managers who will do everything they can, sometimes, if you like, the forces are laid around them simply prevent them from being successful. And it has to be said, why on earth should this be? I can't think of any other area of a business operations where such barriers would be tolerated. Yes, it's true that in most of the best practice there's stuff on leadership, stuff on stakeholder management, on communications, and even lots on project organization. But with things like that, it's not really about the people, it's more about what processes their roles are about. So it's the project manager, the planner, the change controller, the risk manager. And yes, there's lots of stuff about teams, but there's not out there to read and to use. But there's not too much about teams specifically in the project space. And that's the issue. The process stuff is integrated. Planning, risks, issues, reviews, change control, etc. The technology stuff is designed to work with the process stuff. Create a schedule, add resources, link to risks, e-documents, and so on. But people are, well, where are they? There's a bit here, there's a bit there, there's a bit over there, but for the most part, the people stuff is disconnected. And the biggest barrier to the people stuff was actually us, people themselves. We fear change. There's often no organization culture for change. It's not surprising. Most businesses are business as usual, and business as usual cultures, and especially behaviors and mindsets, are quite different. An example of that is it's no good taking a magic wand, waving it at an executive and saying, now you are magically imbued with the powers and knowledge and skills of a project sponsor. It doesn't happen like that. Most of such people have developed their careers in an operational environment, and they have operational ways of thinking, which is not to say that they don't understand change, and they've done change and improvement during their careers. But actually, the Western way of doing change management is quite a different mindset normally from that required to maintain an operational business. Which also therefore means that leaders don't get change, and actually quite often they don't get projects as well. They may think they know about them. For example, I've done some sponsorship, some coaching recently for project sponsors, and whilst they understood it in their heads, they didn't get it in their hearts at all and didn't exhibit any of the necessary behaviors. Change also, as I've mentioned, really competes with business as usual for resources, for attention, project management, program management. They're not sexy. They're not things that executives want to turn their attention to. It's important for us to be able to demonstrate what the value is of what we can do in organizations. So the value to me is finding ways of getting that 30, 40, 70% failure rates down to far, or at least increasing performance and getting far better failure rates across different industries. And the fact is, we're often scared of the people stuff. For proof, I wonder how many of you prefer text or email rather than go and talk to someone. Perhaps I should have made that my poll question. And the irony, people stuff is called soft skills when it's the hardest stuff in project management. And that's why I maintain that people is difficult. But there is a ray of hope. And enough of the doom and gloom. There's growing recognition of the value of the people stuff. examples of which include the associations of project management's focus on leadership and professional ethics. I should try that again, professionalism and ethics as the two main competencies. Looking perhaps outside the pure realm of projects, Ryanair customer service change has seen passenger numbers improve by more than 10% in 6 months. The National Audit Office report citing behaviour as a key factor in major failures, for example in the fire control program. Then there's people like Professor Cotter of Harvard, who's a major author and researcher on change, and he did a report into the Kodak bankruptcy, citing the board's behaviour as a major factor in that bankruptcy. Sadly, there are also roads not yet travelled, and here I have to take the APM to task after praising them. For example, in the area of agile thinking, where they've placed agile firmly under the heading of planning and controls, mechanistic, not people, which for me just leaves the people stuff as being fragmented. But there's also some good activity going on out there, not just recognition, but also action too. You've got BAA adopting an intelligent client approach for Heathrow redevelopment. This has resulted in a sea change in construction, contracting and behaviours with their third-party suppliers. There's a global technology company that has developed a client-supplier collaboration model for a commercial relationship based on trust. There is the very existence of the Major Projects Leadership Academy in UK government. There's an increasing amount of blogging on behavioural issues both on LinkedIn and many other sites. And there's a massive interest I see in behavioural events, and I put a small plug in here for EVA 19 in April. So where does this give us? What's ahead for the next 10 years? Well, for me, this has to be about creating organizations fit for projects through its processes, through its tools, and above all, through its organization culture. In other words, through its people. Thank you very much. I've got to hand over to my colleague, Geoff Leigh.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Geoff Leigh, and I'm just trying to comfortably get into Adrian's chair. And I would like to share my personal experiences over the decades in terms of how I've seen governance change and evolve. I would like to very briefly go back to the early part of my career as a way of helping express where I saw governance was 10 years ago. How did we get into that state of 10 years ago? I started my career around programs and projects back in the 1970s. There were a lot of projects that I was coordinating, but in those days computing power was very limited. There was still a lot of information that had to be processed and analyzed, so we had to develop very simple ways of doing things. We wanted to make sure that what we did was going to be of use to those in a governance role, and so we spent time at the beginning talking to the directors to ask them what they wanted, developed simple mechanisms, and through that it worked. So we got the understanding, the buy-in of those in a governance role. We produced simple systems for way to present them with their information and their decision processes. What happened after that then? Well, we all got lots of computers. IT is everywhere. You've got personal computers. They're now cheap as chips. We got best practice. Prince 2 started to come onto the scene, Pinbot, and followed on later with program management best practices, which have been refined and evolved. The computer department, IT, started to drive business change back in the 1980s. Through all of these things, what I saw was that executives started to become disconnected. Technical people were getting on with doing stuff, doing changes, and they left, and many of them left them to it. Projects and programs were left to fend for themselves, and many of them struggled and failed, particularly those that were driven by technically oriented people were not accepted, not wanted, not the right thing for the operational side of the business. What I saw in those early days in the 80s and 90s were directors and executives who were starting to see these failures, and their view was, it's not our fault. At the senior level, we've appointed professional project managers. They've got the computers, they've got the best practice. If it goes wrong, it's their fault. And I've seen many people sacked for that reason. 10 years ago then, we had boards of directors who had become executive teams, who had become leadership teams. We'd got an evolution of change of name. But 10 years ago, I wasn't seeing a great deal of effective leadership in terms of leading, managing change. Initiatives seem to be ad hoc. An analogy that I'm going to develop a little bit more in a moment is the project brief are thrown over the wall. Many projects and programs were in the mission impossible category. The ideas were often wrong for the organization, not of strong strategic value. So the wrong things were being started, and they were being managed in the wrong way. All of this meant that solutions were rushed and patched together. There wasn't proper governance. Rarely did you see programs and projects stopped or seriously redirected. Sadly, much of this patching together would take place once new systems had actually gone live and were in operation. Very disruptive, very expensive. There was therefore lots of money wasted, little gain from the investment. But yet we get more and more best practice, and we get more and more powerful software. One person said to me some years ago, all of these tools, all of this wonderful software, all of these processes are fine, but you've got to bring your brain along as well. I feel that to some extent we were getting too mechanistic in following the best practice processes and not thinking about how to adapt it, how people should use it, particularly those performing a governance role. So what's changed in that 10 years? What are some of the factors that have caused the senior executives to do things differently? Well, there have been a number of regulatory and financial events. The Companies Act 2006, the banking crisis, have now caused directors, certainly in the private sector, to up their game. Times are generally tougher. We have been going through a difficult recession, not just in the UK, but in many parts of the world. Organizations have been finding they've got to be smarter or they will disappear. The culture that I've seen in some very large organizations some years ago who were cash rich will just throw more money at it if it goes wrong. For many organizations is no longer a viable approach. A lot of the easier stuff has been done. We've had all the easier IT projects. People have got those on their desk. They've got their basic systems and software. Now what I'm seeing are challenges to organizations that are more difficult, more uncertain, and they need more rigor in terms of their management and their governance. Organizations are starting to ask, how good are we in our PPM arena? And they're using benchmarking methods like P3M3. So they're beginning to understand where they are, how mature they are, where their weaknesses are. But more important, perhaps, in terms of what's causing them to be smarter, is they're able to see how they compare with other organizations. That's causing some senior people leading organizations to say, we want to be better than our competitors. We want to be better than the average. Leaders are starting to understand what leadership really is, and I am seeing some evidence that is taking place in managing change, not just leading the day-to-day business as usual part of organizations. Those in a governance role, I'll call them sponsors for the moment, are beginning to realize there's more to this than just getting the latest bright ideas started. So we've got best practice governance, and I believe over the last 10 years that hasn't changed that radically. It's been refined, it's been tweaked, but it's not massively different. So if it's working better now, why is it? What has changed over that period? let me try and tell that through a storyline. This is how I've seen things evolve. So we used to have executives who were sat in their ivory tower and knew that stuff went on in other parts of the organization. I've nicknamed that the factory in my analogy. There was, therefore, the analogy of a brick wall between those executives and people doing the stuff, the program, the project managers, their teams. The executives would dispatch these briefs, which were often not very clear, often to impossible deadlines, and didn't have full cognizance of the extent to which the program and project management people were already overworked anyway, and that maybe the organization was in a state of change overload. Gradually, the smarter of those executives began to realize that too many things were not working, and that maybe they should start to look why. So in my analogy again, they started to look through the wall to see what was going on in the factory. As they did that and started to understand better, those smart executives again were thinking, maybe there is something we should do. A lot of the conflicts are to do with overload, dependencies across different programs and projects, not having enough funding, feeding the wrong ideas to the programs and projects, not getting the right sort of feedback. The things that individual programs and projects cannot and should not be trying to resolve for themselves. Today, the really smart ones have recognized that we need to just get rid of that wall. If you're in a governance role, if you're a sponsor or whatever, you actually need to be part of the team. You need to be in there helping. It's not a full-time job, but it's more than going to the occasional meeting, making the odd decisions. What have we got today? I believe we've got sponsors and others in governance roles who are now beginning to understand the degree to which they have to be actively involved throughout the change life cycle. They're recognizing that they need proper change teams. In the governance role, the sponsor are part of that team. It is part of their role to help develop that team so that the project team, their customer, internal or external, and those in governance are actively working together effectively. Governance is being recognized as being more than just making decisions. People are recognizing that it's about directing. A phrase that I've heard recently, which I really like, is those sponsors have to regularly nudge projects or programs in the right direction as either the external environment changes somewhat or the project or program wanders off its course. There are often occasions when things go wrong that are beyond the ability or the authority of a program project manager. That needs support of those senior. There needs to be a sharing of the pain and the gain, not the old culture that I used to see where those in a governance role just blames the program or project managers. I'm seeing that governance is becoming slimmer and smarter. I'm just using here one example. I'm now seeing very large programs, often hundreds of millions, in some cases billions of pounds in terms of their budget, where they are being effectively controlled using one-page dashboards. All right, it's an A3 page and there's quite a lot on there, but that contrasts with what they were trying to tackle some years ago, where they were getting 60-page reports or thereabouts at their program or project board meetings. Yeah, there's lots of detail behind it, but they only consider the really important matters first and focus their energy on just those areas where it's needed. My conclusions: best practice guidance is evolving. It's important. It's a key part of what is needed. Tools are essential. We still have and will continue to have lots of information that needs to be processed and analyzed. All of these are critical, not just for managing the programs and projects day to day, but in order to perform good governance. The factor that makes or breaks good governance, in my view, is the people in those roles. If they understand their role, if they behave appropriately, it will make a huge huge difference.
I think we're going to shift straight on to Geoff too.
Reiss speaking here. I'm going to just very briefly talk about what's happening and what has happened over the last 10 years in portfolio management. I'm an honorary fellow of the APM, which means I've got grey hair and a grey beard, and I'm very proud to have been a chairman of ProgM in the past, and I've been involved in program management for a very long time. One of the people who sat on the review panel of the first copy of Managing Successful Programs from the UK government. Let's first of all say that 10 years ago, when we were working on the Gower Handbook, it really was very unclear what program management, what portfolio management actually meant. And there was a lot of discussion about that. And I'm speaking specifically of portfolio management, not program management and not project management now. So as you'll see from these two definitions, one from APM Box 6 here in the UK and one from PIMBOK 4, which is from the PMI in America, that at least on both sides of the pond now we've got a pretty much aligned unanimity about what portfolio management is. And it's very much about the organization delivering its own strategy through carefully selecting and authorizing specific programs and projects. And that's what I'm talking about today. I think one of the big questions behind that is that is yet to be fully addressed is what role does the project management profession play in choosing the project an organization is going to follow. So at least we agree what it actually means. But let's ask a first poll here. What percentage of your organizational spend on improvement projects and programs, in your view, is likely to deliver your organization's strategy? While that's going on, let me just press on. 10 years ago, approximately more than 10 years ago now, 12 years ago, Gartner did some very interesting studies. They looked at some of the largest IT-based organizations in America. That's the major banks and insurance and savings and loans and so on. They talked to the CIOs of those companies, and these should be the best people in the world. These should be the people who are the most advanced and the most progressive and the most cautious and most careful. And of that group, and bear in mind we are talking about the best of the best here, in 2001, at the beginning of the last decade, only 27% said, yes, we measure benefits. Some said, about half said, yes, we do a bit. And quite a good percentage, nearly a quarter, over a quarter, said, no, we don't do that at all. And asking those people the question, how many of your programs deliver benefits, the answer was 1 in 4. So 3/4 of programs that the best were running were not able to deliver any kind of benefit at all. Why would you do those? What would be the purpose of that? Less scientifically, here in the UK, I think back in 2001, 2003, if the UK government had been able to prove or show that 1 in 10 public sector programs delivered a benefit, they'd have been cock-a-hoop, they'd have been delighted. I'm sure we were not achieving levels like that. Another study at the time was run by Forrester, another US-based consultancy, and they said that the CIOs they talked to rated program prioritization, which program should we be prioritizing, which program should we be doing, was their biggest single challenge. So there was certainly lots of room for improvement 10 years ago. In 2009, ProgM did a survey of APM members and asked them, what part of your organization is portfolio management activities relevant in? And you can see that nearly half of the organizations within the APM covered the whole organization. All of the organization, the whole strategy was being run through portfolio management. But still, the other half said, well, we only do a bit of it, or we don't do much of it, or one particular department does it, and other departments don't. So again, plenty of scope for improvement and development there. I think one of the rather interesting things about the last 10 years is that by coincidence, or fortunately, PwC have asked the same questions at 3 different times over that period. And you'll see that from 2004 to 2007, the percentage of organizations using portfolio management did increase quite significantly. And that ties in very well with the pressure that was put on, the requirements that were shown, and how it wasn't being done very well. But in the last 5 years, it's rather stayed constant, and that's rather curious. But the other key finding of this organization is that those who are using portfolio management believe that they're getting better results from it, which is good to hear. The key finding was the organizations that adopt portfolio management can experience greater satisfaction with their project performance. In other words, because they're choosing in a better way, they're delivering in a better way, and they feel more happy about the way they're delivering their improvements to the organization. Activity has certainly increased over the period. There was a very good case study, I thought, in ProgM magazine in February this year. I'm sure you will all have access to that. It was a very interesting organization. Curiously, they called it Project Selection and Prioritization, PSP, but a reading of the article makes it clear they were actually talking about what I would call portfolio management. In the last few years, we've seen the development and the launch of the portfolio SIG and the benefit management SIG, which has already been mentioned, and a proliferation of tools specifically designed to support portfolio management. I'm not talking about critical path tools and Microsoft Project et al. I'm talking about tools that are specifically designed to work in the portfolio management marketplace, and a lot of tools have appeared in that market. So there seems to be a lot of activity going on. As John pointed out, there have been a lot of books on benefit management. There have been books about portfolio management too. But the picture, in my view, is by no means perfect. There's a lot of organizations still, and that would, according to Pricewaterhouse, would be about half, do not recognize portfolio management at all. And that either means that they're not using they're either not using portfolio management to manage their portfolio, they are not using step change programs of change at all, or perhaps they're not changing at all, and they're just happy with the way they are. So there's a lot of those groups. Clearly some can improve a great deal. I believe there are an awful lot of pet projects. And by a pet project, I mean something that somebody has dreamed up. It might be usually by somebody quite powerful and influential. Often these are quite high-risk initiatives created by far-seeing visionaries. My favorite example of that is Virgin Galactic. This idea for holidays in space was originally proposed to Sir Richard Branson by a schoolboy in a radio program. And he went off and started an organization called Virgin Galactic. And today you could go now, assuming you've got the necessary cash, to buy a holiday for a ticket in space, and you'll probably get your ride next year. So that's a program that quite clearly is a program made up of a very wide range of projects, which did not go through a portfolio management process because it was one of those visionary ideas from a visionary person. And I think we have to accept, and we should accept, that there's a good case for those. But many projects, unfortunately, are not like that. Many pet projects are actually where somebody with a lot of influence or a very persuasive person is trying to use the organization's resources and cash not for the benefit of the organization at all, but for the benefit of themselves or a group of people that they're involved with. Sometimes it just seemed like a good idea at the time. I'm particularly concerned about those in the public sector where we taxpayers are actually paying money for programs and projects that are really designed to improve somebody's career in politics or the civil service. I don't think that should happen, and I hope that portfolio management will limit that and one day bring it to an end. It seems to me that in the last 10 years we've seen a big increase in the use of portfolio management, and it has reduced the likelihood of pet projects getting the go-ahead. It still seems to me that in many organizations a powerful, persuasive person will get their program, will get an idea burst into a program, and it's much more likely that a well-backed program will launch, will go, will get a green light, the flag will drop. It's much more important to have senior backup than it is to have a viable idea. But we have seen a significant increase in the use of portfolio management, and perhaps it's having an effect in that area. Lots of tools and processes have emerged, documents, books, software tools, all sorts of things have emerged, and that's been a good thing. And perhaps we're making better use of the techniques within the organizations that we have seen. But nevertheless, there is still plenty of room for improvement. And I think part of that improvement will come when the profession of program management, project management, addresses the issue of what role do we have to play in the selection of the projects that we are being asked to deliver. I think we're going to go now to another poll. I'm going to pass back to Merv to place that.
Okay, thanks so much, Geoff, and straight into the tool now. It is the same question that we posed before. Which ingredient makes the greatest contribution to program success? And I need to compare with the original ones, but it looks like Adrian, managing people, is still well out in front, so well done on that.